Great to see some familiar names and some unfamiliar names in the participants list down here.
Yeah, they're just wrapping up the session right now, Catherine.
Cool.
So you'll start seeing people stream over.
Yeah, give it maybe 30 more seconds. We've only got 10 people here. All right, we're 2 minutes past, so maybe we'll get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the PISP session. My name is Lewis. I'm one of the developers from Crosslake working on PISP. I'm joined also by JJ. I don't know if you want to say hi quickly, JJ.
Hi, I'm JJ. I'm a software engineer at Google. We're particularly interested in this work stream. Been working with Lewis and friends from way back when in January of last year. So lots of stuff ongoing.
Yep, and we've also got Dave from Modusbox.
Hi, everyone.
Who's helping us organize ourselves and a bit of a Scrum Master. So let's dive in. Pavel, who's kind of one of the lead devs, couldn't join us today, but we've got a few slides from him that we're going to be presenting. So I was just doing the maths in my head, and I think this is the 5th session that we've actually talked about PISP in a convening. So it's exciting to see things really taking shape. So this is just a little bit of what we're going to be talking about. A little bit of background. We keep these slides in kind of every time. PISP stands for Payment Initiation Service Provider. It's a idea of a participant, or in a merge loop sense, a participant who can initiate payments from a user's account where they don't hold that user's account. It's on behalf of a different DFSP. The term comes from the PSD2 Payment Services Directive 2 definitions out of Europe. And it's a kind of a trend that we're seeing in a bunch of different schemes within a bunch of different, I guess, regulations and banking kind of trends going on around the world. In Mojaloop, like I said, it's a new participant role. So it's not a direct participant with Mojaloop, but it does talk to a certain API called the third-party API. It doesn't hold any liquidity, and it doesn't hold any kind of, there's no settlement requirements, so there's less risk and perhaps less regulations for a PISP to join a scheme as opposed to DFSP. Here's just a little high-level overview of what a PISP could look like. Aisha is our customer in the middle. She holds an account with the DFSP here on the left, and she has a smartphone as well, with which she has signed up for a PISP's services. The PISP can link the account that she holds with her DFSP to the PISP's application and allow her to send transactions or initiate transactions on her behalf using strong authentication. In our case, we're using FIDO. We've also added this slide more recently just to talk a little bit about some global trends around PISP. There's a general trend of the unbundling of banking services. So banks do a lot of different things, and maybe they shouldn't be as involved, or maybe they don't want to be as involved in making good user experience or user interfaces for users. And maybe they can unbundle some of the services around doing payments really well to players like fintechs in different markets. There's also a whole bunch of regulations that have come into place from UK open banking, the EU, as we mentioned, UPI, and there's a few others, or plenty of others going on, where regulators are seeing this is a service that banks maybe there should be a bit more of a level playing field when it comes to payment initiation. And there's a lot of great value that fintechs can provide when they're really close and really focused on user experience. Within the Mojaloop perspective, we've got prospective national payment initiatives who are interested in this type of functionality, and Google has been providing most of the resourcing for a lot of the PISP work, as well as a lot of design, and Mojaloop Foundation and the Gates Foundation has been doing a bit, especially for my time. So I think the main thing to say is for Mojaloop, this is the first time that we're really doing these third-party overlay services on top of the core idea of payments. And this is really setting the stage for how Mojaloop goes about adding these extra services on top of switches. And the cool thing about open source is once you've implemented it here, you can take it and use it there, here as well, with a very low cost. At least that's the idea. So we're really excited to see how this works and how this goes out into the market. So JJ, I think kind of more on this point around design and other countries who are interested, I'll just hand over to you to talk about the design principles doc.
Sure. So we were designing this whole bit of functionality for Mojaloop, right? Supporting PISPs on the Mojaloop switch, which is, it's a new type of participant with a specific set of things that it's able to do. As everyone probably knows, payment initiators don't necessarily hold their own liquidity funds, so they can't actually send money. They only ask other people to send money. And as Lewis said, this is sort of the first foray into adding non-DFSP participants into Mojaloop, and we're expecting to see all sorts of new ones down the line. Who knows? But we're trying to set the stage for third-party type participants. One of the things we kept seeing, though, is a lot of RTP systems around the world that are not Mojaloop were wanting to build out their payment initiation support for their RTP system. Like NPP was building something out. The new system that just recently launched in Pakistan was trying to expand on this. And there's a bunch of others out there that are exploring this type of functionality. PIX in Brazil is exploring as well. And so we got all these people who were like, hey, like, we want to do this, we want to do it right. Like, how do we do this? And a lot of them were coming up with some interesting designs. Not always, my favorites, but they were fascinating. But the big takeaway here was we spent all this time designing the system, and we spent, or continuing to spend, quite a bit of time building out the system. We have a fully functional, as you'll see, sort of demo here, but there's still more work to be done around testing and support and all sorts of other things there. We couldn't necessarily share that code. The code isn't really useful to other governments who are deploying their country's RTP systems, right? They're not going to look at the Mojaloop code and then go and copy it to build their own thing. They're also not just going to lift and shift the Mojaloop node code over to, in TypeScript over to their system. And so we were thinking, well, what's the best way to help them understand and share as much as we can about what we've done here with our PISP or third-party payment initiation through VPI. And we came up with this idea of like, well, let's sort of define the design principles that went into this, and then we'll share that. And so I'm happy to sort of announce here, I guess it's been out for a little while, but it's only recently been, it's been done for a little while, but it's only recently been shared with governments and things like that. But we actually, I wrote this white paper that sort of covers, and it's published under Google Research. It covers all of the different design principles that went into our designs for adding PISP support to Mojaloop. Focusing primarily on things like user experience, security, and user privacy at the end of the day. So it addresses things like FIDO and how do we avoid redirects and all of these interesting ways of how do payment initiation requests get routed to the right initiating bank through an RTP system, what options are available, which ones are better than others, things of that nature. And so far the reception has been quite good. We've gotten a lot of countries in Latin America, Southeast Asia, and Africa who've taken a look and at least said, okay, yeah, this makes sense, which is ultimately our goal, right? We're trying to, the point of this white paper was to say to people, okay, so there's plenty of ways to design third-party payment initiation and add support for PISPs on your real-time payment switch. Here's one, or at least some design principles that should lead you to one, that will very likely lead to a great outcome in a variety of attributes here. In this case, it was security, privacy, and UX. And that's been largely successful. We've seen people look at the design principles and say, okay, this makes sense. So, thank you so much. I wanted to say to the Moduloop community for all the support. So it's been sort of, I think, a team effort to come up with these design principles and ultimately the designs and code that we have. If anyone's curious, take a look at the white paper. There is a link at the bottom there under Google Research. You can search for it on research.google if the link isn't clickable on the screen here. But yeah, it's I think a great way for us to share our work with Moduloop for people who are just working on RTP systems generally, and not necessarily people who are actually running the Moduloop system. So we can still influence the world even if they're not running the Moduloop code. So I think it's a great step forward. Thanks, Lewis. Back to you.
Cool. Thanks, JJ. So now we've got a couple of little demos to share. I'm just going to link to them now. I think just in the interest of time, we'll come back and do the live demo if we have time at the end. Because I don't want to not be able to explain it well enough that we have so many questions that we end up spending all the time answering questions. But two demos to highlight to you that are available on Pathable. First one is the one that Pavel presented yesterday around the testing toolkit and how we're using, we've got end-to-end tests, or sorry, integration tests running end-to-end for, I suppose not end-to-end, but integration tests running on the PISP side against the testing toolkit. And that gives you a feel also for the different API calls and how they're being used. We've also got the front-end application. We previously had some of the work done by some interns to build a Flutter application, and more recently, which does the payment initiation as a reference application. And we've been working pretty hard on adapting that for web, so it's more shareable as a demo, and we've integrated the native Fido libraries from browsers into those, so it works really nicely on your whether it be it your desktop computer or also your phone, and it's working pretty well with native hardware and then external hardware like a YubiKey. So we can come back to that. Feel free to go to this site here, pineapplepay.mojolab.live, and we'll come back and do this if we get the time. I think we will, but I want to make sure I'm able to explain it properly. And we have tested it with a bunch of different browsers. Safari has some problems, but feel free to use it, play around with it, try and break it, let us know what breaks. So onto our PI13 update. So we kind of set out with these four main objectives. Firstly, updating our Swagger specification and documentation for both from a PISP and DFSP perspective, who will want to integrate with the PISP functionality. We wanted to do a live linking and transfers demo. We wanted to have not necessarily published and available on a Helm charts, but something preview ready that someone could install. Just like they install Moduloop from Helm, they could install Moduloop along with the PISP features. And we wanted to get an integration guide done. So how did we go? I think we did okay, pretty well on some of these, and others kind of slipped a little bit. We managed to auto-generate TypeScript definitions for common Moduloop objects, which was kind of included in this first objective, but was also a bit of a side thing. And that's going to speed up development in the future. So you can import definitions and use them directly in your TypeScript code, and you get all this nice like auto completion and strong typing, and all the nice code niceties that kind of go along with that. We've got these updated to the latest API draft like we wanted, and these are in sync as much as we can as the API draft changes. So I'd say this objective we did complete successfully. We've got a live linking and transfers demo like I just showed you, and you can check that out yourself, or look at our demo video for a full explainer. We've also got some reference code available that's currently in active development. Now, we don't have this fully integrated with a running Moduloop switch. We've got a running Moduloop switch with PISP support running, and we've got the demo running, but we don't currently have all the pieces that link those two things together. And there's a bit more ongoing development work that we're carrying over into the next PI that will address that. But there's also a need to do a bit of that integration as well. We have not quite got a preview ready in Helm, but we have a preview ready in the in my own kind of fork of the Helm stuff or Helm config in a separate repository. And this repo here, MLOSS Sandbox, is one that we use to spin up the a current sandbox environment we use for the hackathons, and one we're hoping to add to. But that one also deploys the PISP features alongside the normal modular loop features. And we managed to get rid of all of our all but one of our PISP forks, because we'd originally done a lot of forking to get development up and running fast, and we've merged back upstream, and we haven't broken anything. Well, I think if we'd broken stuff, I would have heard about it now. So I'm pretty sure we're all good there. Well, that's not quite ready to go into the modular Helm repo, but we are working on that. PISP integration guide, probably this is the piece we've done the least on, but we did end up producing a guide for the hackathon on how you can, as a PISP, integrate with the APIs. But this needs more work, and we'll come to that as a part of the resourcing and kind of our roadmap items that Dave's going to be sharing with us about. So some other objectives that weren't really in our PI, but were covered, and we knew that we'd have to do them in many ways. So designing and implementing some of the error handling. One of the previous, I guess, where we were at the last PI was you could talk to modular loop, you could talk to the third-party API in modular loop, and if something went wrong, you wouldn't ever know about it. I call it the black hole. Things would just disappear into the black hole, and we didn't have any error handling in that case. And we've designed all of our error handling scenarios now, and we're currently in implementation for that, maybe about 50% of the way through. We've added a new consent oracle type, which allows us to register this link between a PISP and a DFSP with an oracle, which is kind of a kicking off point for a bunch of future features that we'll want with PISP down the line. But it also helps us to complete our current set of features. We did a lot of work around the third party and the SDK scheme adapters. I think one of the things we previously underestimated was a lot of the interactions with modular loop are quite simple, because modular loop not typically, but in a lot of cases is just passing messages from one participant to another, be it from a DFSP to a DFSP or a PISP to a DFSP or whatnot. But in order to get proper testing and really reliable end-to-end tests for a lot of these scenarios, you have to implement, we've needed to implement this third-party scheme adapter, which enables us to not only do our tests, but also give prospective PISPs and DFSPs essentially a toolkit with which they can go ahead and implement and make the implementation process easier for them. So we've done a lot of work there, and that's also fed upstream to some of the other SDK work with modular loop. And we've also designed, we don't have it quite in the demo flow yet, but designed some APIs to help us do our testing in the future with OTP and the web for testing or demonstrating the example login flows for a user. Additionally, we've piloted some automated releases, so taking some of our expertise that we learned in some of our own repositories with doing PISPs and managed to contribute that back upstream to modular loop around doing automated releases. And we've done a lot of learning from that, and we might probably do some tweaking. We've expanded the usage of API snippets, and we're excited to see that grow. And as I said, we did some improvements to the SDK scheme adapters, including this async to sync generic transaction pattern, which will make future development and future improvements to the SDKs even easier. So design updates. Now, I was unfortunately already in bed by the time Michael presented on the CCB and SIGs last night, so hopefully I'm not covering too much of what he's already said. But we've done 4 more revisions to the API draft, and thank you, Michael, for your tireless work on the API draft. we're always nitpicking and coming back with changes. So thanks for putting up with us. And that's open for discussion. So feel free to look at that in your own time. As far as the API status goes, we've divided the API into two sections. One is linking, the process of linking an account from a PISP to DFSP. And the other is transfers, the process of initiating a transfer from a PISP. So linking has been approved. We're pretty happy with that. Probably needs a few tweaks here and there, just minor things, data models and whatnot. And transfers are still in discussion. There's been a few questions raised about how we're going about things and whether or not that's the right way to do them. So just down the bottom, if you're interested in contributing and helping us shape the look of these third-party APIs, you're very welcome to join us. Please reach out to me or anyone else on the team. We can make sure you're added to those calls. They're also public on we have a community calendar, and I'm pretty sure they're there. I will make a note to double check that I have kept them up to date. Or I think we're going to be starting a new series, so I'll make sure that I update them if that time changes. I think Pawa's kind of already covered this in the demo and yesterday as well, just around using the testing toolkit with the PISP. But I think the main thing to note is that we're getting really good quality tests, and we're really happy with how things are working in our testing scenarios, and that's helping us to accelerate development for PISP. We've shared these slides as well. Like I just mentioned around the scheme adapters working together. I'm going to skip over them here because there's probably not too much new to talk about. But essentially, we're talking about, these slides cover some of the designs about how we get what's called the third-party scheme adapter working with the other scheme adapters. So kind of SDKs working together. This was a design in the previous PR, which we've actually gone ahead and implemented, and Pawa's really led the charge of that. So thanks, Pawa. Dave, I'll hand over to you to talk about the roadmap, if that's all right.
Thanks for that, Lewis. So yeah, the main goal for PI14 for the PISP team is really to enable a hackathon to expand PISP adoption and innovation in the community. So as Lewis has already alluded to, we've got demos of the PISP workflow. But the key outstanding piece around that is to actually integrate it with the ModuLoop sandbox so that that demo is widely available and really getting it out into the community. Our second key piece of work is actually completing that reference PISP application so that for hackathons or anybody interested, there are real world code samples available and an easy to use template for hackathons with SDK examples. Also, as Lewis alluded to, we've carried over the work around all success and error scenarios being handled. So the majority of that work's completed. I think we've got about half a dozen error scenarios that currently, if something went wrong, you could kind of disappear into a black hole with no response. So it's all of the design work around that's done, but it's just wrapping up implementation of those existing or those final error scenarios. And the bulk of the work for PI14, we're looking at actually running a hackathon for PISPs and encapsulating all of the associated preparation work for that into that. So there's a lot of work behind that. So that would involve actually spinning up and configuring a hackathon environment for use for that. And we're assuming at this stage that that would be, I say manually configured, it wouldn't be fully automated. So this would be, there'd be probably a few weeks work to actually get the hackathon environment up and running, but something enough to prove that this is doable. Obviously, we'd need to have all the basic documentation and guides enabling a hackathon. So again, that wouldn't be necessarily comprehensive, but enough to make it feasible. Similarly, the same with scenarios. We wouldn't have a comprehensive set of scenarios available, but we'd have enough that PISPs could test against this, and it would actually be usable for a hackathon. And obviously, the SDK ready for that with the appropriate usage guides. So effectively, it's a lightweight version of everything that would be an MVP that meets our needs for a hackathon, but not necessarily everything completely there yet. Some additional opportunities we've identified would be implementing merchant request to pay. So at the moment, everything around PISP is only P2P. So that would be looking at, again, getting PISP demonstrable end-to-end using SIMs for the DFSPs, a sandbox at a hub, and meeting that merchant request to pay use case where merchants could initiate a third-party transaction on a user's behalf. And that would include, PISPs as a recipient of a transaction request. The other additional opportunity that's effectively a stretch goal or likely to carry on into the next PI would be automating the creation of that hackathon environment. So we're assuming that the first case would involve a bunch of manual work and probably Lewis running around in the background keeping things going. But going forward, we want to simplify and automate the creation of that so that hackathons are a easily repeatable activity and much easier for people to run. So our key success metrics for PI14 would be one, obviously, ideally a successful hackathon is run, or at least we're certain that we've enabled everything for that to be run. And the second would be the CCB adoption of the API to formalize, yes, this is actually ready and we're happy that everything's compliant. So our next steps after PI14, and we're looser and vaguer on the time schedules around this, but basically where we want to take this is taking PISP to beta somewhere. So everything required to enable and support a hub operator to actually get this running. So that would involve making sure the API is production ready, everything around security hardening and validation, performance baselining, and making sure everything's scalable, and of course completion of all the associated documentation. So that kind of encapsulates the other key epics we've got there, making sure that we've got a suitable DFSP integration guide available, as well as a PISP integration guide available, and use case guides available so that people can really start to pick this up and run with it with minimal involvement. Of course, we need to include templated scheme rules so that people can actually get this up and running easily, and an automated sandbox deployment with test data so that you can check that this is all working for you. And again, our key metrics for this would be making sure that existing adopters can actually run their own hackathons with minimal support, and that there are no technical limitations to PISP going live in beta with a hub operator. I think going into the future from there is obviously getting PISP enabled and live, and the key being widely available. So rather than requiring a lot of support from the community, we want to have this very self-serve, with one, it being publicly part of the Moduloop Helm releases, two, obviously complete documentation, user guides, templated scheme rules, so everything that you can just pick up and run with this with minimal input from the community. And yeah, the third epic being deploying and supporting a PISP enabled switch, including the SIMs, services for testing, and everything else around that. And again, our key metrics for that would be PISP publicly released, incorporated into the core Moduloop Helm releases. And obviously potential adopters being able to integrate and understand a PISP integration with minimal input from the community. I think it's worth also calling out that we have thought about how PISP and Payment Manager will interact. So in the Payment Manager long-term roadmap, there's work to support the PISP workflows through Payment Manager. So that would bring all of the benefits of Payment Manager, so simplified configuration and onboarding, understanding, monitoring, and accounting of transactions, and security management and configuration. So really just easing the onboarding process to support the PISP workflow. So I'll hand back to Lewis to talk about what we're hoping for from the community.
Thanks, Dave. And I think maybe just in general on the roadmap, I mean, we're kind of, as we go, the more vague we get. And that's just kind of the way it goes. And we're looking for people to help us both guide the direction, and that's what, you know, the community is here for, but also for people to provide resources. And how do we actually do this? So we've got this kind of caveat down the bottom of each of these slides, which says, well, there's a lot of interest in PISP work. There's not really anything finalized, and in fact, we don't have resources for much beyond one of the epics of the four. Number 3 here, we don't have any resources for those beyond I suppose the next week or so. So I think it's we're trying to be, I think, get really better at asking what we need from the community. And that's something that we've been doing a lot of thinking about, and that's why we're coming to you now with this roadmap, and we'll be expanding this a little bit more in tomorrow's session as well, and getting people's input. But if we really want to have a hackathon to be enabled by the end of next PI, or during next PI even, depending on timelines, we need these 4 things. We need help writing the documentation and the user guides. We need the integration work to be done to connect our demo running with a PISP enabled switch. We've got some of the pieces there, but it's not all there. We need some help with the front end development work. I've been hacking around myself, but I'm not great at front end. To make kind of our demo more complete, more feature complete, and to round out some of the edges. And finally, help kind of in terms of marketing to help put on the hackathon. I know we've got DFS Lab. I know that Miller just commented as well about Innocent and the High Pipo team who are interested in this. So we definitely could leverage the many talents and skills of the community here. And these are very kind of specific asks for how we can deliver this stuff in the next PI. Additionally, kind of more generally, we can always use help in these 3 areas: helping us write documentation and guides, helping us test all of this stuff, give us feedback, and use cases. I said it 3 times because it's really important for us to be able to provide use cases. We've had some excellent contributions in the last PI with ideas around use cases that have really helped shape us, some of our thinking, and definitely helped shape the direction of the API and then onto the implementation. So always need more hands, but you know, that's always the way it is. So I guess that's kind of our ask for the community. So thank you everyone for your input, and thank you everyone on the PISP team for your help getting this stuff across the line. What we might do, we've actually got plenty of time, which I was hoping would happen. So we might do the demo, Dave, and then we'll hand it over to some more questions, if that's all right. Does that sound like a good way to go?
Yeah, I think it's worth a quick run through.
Awesome, cool. So let me just reshare my screen, and let's just find where that demo went. Now, the demo it was originally written for Android. It was written by our Google interns last year while they're on their internships remotely, and we've managed to actually adopt it for web, because web is a little bit easier for us to share demos with people around the world. We don't require them to download an application, and it works cross-platform just by going to a browser. Well, that's the idea, but you know, it doesn't always work like that. But so we've got time to actually probably go through most of the full thing. Our demo is called Pineapple Pay, and currently it's the way it works is currently detached from the Mojaloop sandbox. It has a detached mode where it's just kind of running simulated scenarios with fake data. We have it in that mode partly because the integration work isn't all done, but also partly because then it allows you guys in the community to go and log onto this site and muck around, and you don't break anything or anything too serious. So please, by all means, try this out and see how you go. Now, what I have on my device is a YubiKey, which is just plugged in to USB. So that's the hardware that I'm going to be using to do the FIDO registration and then attestation. So the FIDO registration for the account linking and then the attestation for the transfer. So when I log into Pineapple Pay, I can link my bank accounts. Now, what we see here is a list of different banks or DFSPs that support the PISP functionality within a Mojaloop switch. We have 3 banks here: Apple Bank, Banana Bank, Carrot Mobile Money. So let's say, for example, I use Carrot Mobile Money for my my mobile money needs, and now we can enter kind of what we call an opaque identifier. So whatever I use to log onto Carrot Mobile Money, we can pass on to Pineapple Pay, and Pineapple Pay is going to help us do the login. Now, I think in our example, we are in Tanzania, so we'll use some Tanzanian phone numbers here. And we're going to do the account lookup, and Carrot Mobile Money has returned to Pineapple Pay saying, yes, I know this account, and it holds these 2 accounts. Sorry, I know this identifier, and that identifier has these 2 accounts. And we can select one or both of them that we'd like to link. Let's just select both for now, and we can hit link. The API supports either OTP or web-based authentication. So web, where you get a redirect link to maybe an application or to another web page with where you want to do like a full OAuth type login, at the end of which you get an auth token that is provided back to the application, or you can get an OTP. OTP based authentication, and I'm just going to pretend I received an OTP on my phone. I didn't, because I'm in Australia, not Tanzania, and we don't have the demo working with OTP just yet. So let's just say I received an OTP from Carrot Mobile Money 111222, and now Carrot Mobile Money knows that yes, it's Lewis. I can verify that they're willing to use Pineapple Pay. The OTP message might contain something along the lines of, hey, someone's tried to log into your account, or Pineapple Pay wants to link these 2 different accounts. Are you okay with this? If so, please type in this code. Now, when I hit link, Pineapple Pay is going to call the native WebAuthn APIs of my browser. And that's going to then talk to the hardware, the YubiKey that I just plugged into my computer here. Now, this also works for a fingerprint scanner on a phone. I haven't tested it myself on an iPhone, but I think on an iPhone with Chrome, it should work. So please test it out if you've got an iPhone and let me know with like Face ID or something. So let's hit link. We can hit proceed. So my browser just giving me a bit of a warning, and then I can tap my YubiKey, and now my 2 accounts are linked. And that private key, there's a public-private key pair that is being created. The private key is now shared with Mojaloop, so the public key is shared with Mojaloop. The private key sits on that hardware and stays always on that hardware and can't even be accessed by Pineapple Pay. Next, we can send a transfer. So let's send a transfer to my friend here. This is their phone number, and to Rachel Brecky. Brecky is Australian for breakfast, so that's kind of funny. I think it's New Zealand for breakfast as well, I'm not sure. So let's send them 1,000 shillings. We can use our checking account that we just linked with Carrot Mobile Money. And now the PISP is talking to my DFSP. That DFSP is doing a quotation and then sending back the result of that quotation. Now, that result then gets displayed to me, the end user, to say, you wanted to send 1,000 shillings, and there's going to be 10 shilling transfer fee, and so 990 is going to reach Miss Brecky. When I hit authorize payment, we're now going to do the FIDO attestation flow. So where that public-private key pair that we registered earlier, I'm going to sign some component of that quotation request with that private key, and then that signed result will be sent to Mojaloop and then sent on to the DFSP, who can verify, yes, this was Lewis's fingerprint, or this was Lewis's YubiKey, the same hardware that authorizes transaction. So the DFSP can trust, yes, this is actually Lewis who's happy with the transaction, and we want to proceed. So I hit authorize payment, I tap my YubiKey, and successful. We can see that the transaction went through. So if I hit reload, we don't have that refreshing yet, but if I hit reload, you can see that that transaction will show up there. So that's a quick run through of a demo. You're welcome to try it out yourself. Like I said, see if you can break anything, that would be great, and let us know. I think now we might just move to more general questions or comments. Let me see if I can present this screen again. Oh, it gave up. So yeah, I'll just open it up to anyone. I haven't been monitoring the what's it called, Pathable page, but I would ask that you, if you want to ask questions that live longer than this Zoom chat, please do comment on the Pathable, and we can ask this as well. But if there's anyone who in the meeting now, if you do have a bit of time, maybe 15 minutes or so, has a question, please raise your hand or unmute yourself, and we can try and get to that.
There haven't been any in Pathable yet, so a few have come through.
Haven't been any? Okay, cool. Yeah. I think there's been some comment about hackathons and talking to Jake and Innocent as well. Cool. Well, I mean, yeah, I don't see any questions. Maybe
Louis, Paula here.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on when you would be targeting to have the hackathon?
I think in the next PI. I think it's a question of how ready. I think we could be ready to do it in a month if we really needed to, and that would kind of be a good kick in the pants, kick up. Yeah, is that the term? I don't know. Get us into gear, so to speak. I think the longer we wait, the more complete stuff will be on the Switch side. But really, I think a lot of the work with the hackathon will be around the documentation and making things easy for users to understand and get up and running.
Thank you.
Louis,
thanks, yeah.
Can I?
Go ahead, please.
Okay.
Is that
I'm Tarun Mohan from NextGen in India, and we've been working in Africa now for many years, and also in India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And the primary customer in these countries is not a smartphone customer; it's a feature phone. Like in Africa, the best country is 50% smartphones, which is South Africa, and most of the countries are 10%, 15%, 20%. And we have this, we'd like to put this API deck into a USSD or an SMS environment.
Yeah, that's so. We explicitly cover this in the API design. We initially, our first drafts were very FIDO heavy, and we've since gone back and I would say fixed or opened things up a little bit. So we leave the door wide open for DFSPs who might want to do their own sorts of authentication as well as FIDO or instead of FIDO. We also leave the door open with the account linking phase. We have what's called, we have two different credential types. One is a credential type which is a FIDO credential. The other type is just a generic public-private key pair, and we don't really specify where that private key should live. So the PISP could technically register a private key on the user's behalf. Now that it opens other security kind of attack vectors, but it depends on, I suppose, different scheme rules that could be in place and different kind of, I suppose, risk profiles for the sorts of transactions that a third party might want to initiate. You could say, for example, have a scheme rule that says PISPs can only initiate payments above a certain, under a certain amount. And maybe that could be a way to get around that. I don't know. I don't write the business rules, but certainly we're not just FIDO. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so we like to be a part of the hackathon, and we like to put our system integration and show it to the Mojalo community what we can do with our solution. You're working on secure SMS. Yeah. Okay, so if you can have the access beforehand, then I can speak to Dave or to you also and get the access to the documents and understand them. How do we put it together?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we don't. I myself aren't probably won't be involved. I'll be helping to run the hackathon, but I'm not the person who calls the shots on that. But we certainly would love any feedback you have about the documentation. We're getting better. It's coming along, but yeah, there's still lots of gaps. So any help or reviewing or input you have would be certainly appreciated. Thank you very much.
And Lewis, you guys had early on in the process been exploring the use of an OTP as an alternative to the hardware-based FIDO on the client device. That's something that we have decided is good enough for ATM cash withdrawal, both from a DFSP and a customer protection point of view. And that's another case of payment initiation service provider, although in a funny way. It's the ATM that is the terminal, which is owned by a third-party infrastructure that is initiating and sending a message to the originating DFSP. In this case, it happens to be the customer standing in front of the ATM, and we want to use an OTP to prove that that's them. So of course, we have to trust the ATM infrastructure to collect that PIN and to send it securely back to the Mojaloop system for routing to the DFSP, and of course then to get the answer back and that mapping. It sounds very similar to what you'd be doing with a PISP case, and I wonder if that's also then a case where you could be thinking in a USSD context. People that use USSD payments already know what PINs are, and OTP is something that's been around for a while for merchant.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Like I said, I think we've left things pretty wide open, and I think some of that will come down to scheme rules, perhaps. Maybe Michael could speak more to that, but certainly we're not overly restrictive, I'd say, in the API that requires things like only FIDO, or yeah, FIDO's the only option sort of thing.
No, I think that's absolutely right, Lewis. One of the things we wanted to do is to allow particular schemes or particular participants within schemes to decide what level they could support and to do that.
Yeah.
In the same way as we decided to allow DFSPs to implement the checking systems themselves or to have a central scheme do it. Our idea was for the API to work equally well in either context. We're about trying to enable use cases, not trying to restrict them.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think Russ has his hand raised. Russ, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Lewis. Can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Great, great. I was just wondering, is there a book or manual or dummies kind of thing about what APIs are written for which business cases already existing out there?
With respect to PISP or Mojaloop in general, would you say?
Well, you're saying that you want help with these, with testing these accesses.
Yeah, yeah.
So if you want help with those, it would help us if we were to find the time to do that, to be able to say, okay, here is a specific use case, or here is a specific business need, or here is a specific goal, rather than just sitting there and coding our way out of it.
Sure, certainly. Yeah, so we have a couple of resources already. We have our existing sequence diagrams, and I walk through the linking kind of use case, and then the transfer, the peer-to-peer transfer use case. So I can certainly point you to that. Let me just see if I can find, I'll just copy this into the Zoom chat as well. But we have our own repository, Mojaloop / PISP. And we have a bunch of documentation there.
Is that on GitHub?
Yeah, just on GitHub. I'll just paste that in there. And if you go to our docs, we've got our linking and transfer sequence diagrams that step through those two processes. And then, like I shared, we have that integration guide, which is kind of in a draft status, I would say. Well, mostly draft status, but it does tell you kind of what are the different calls, the API calls, and what do they do.
That'd be awesome.
In terms of business case, yeah, cool. So you're keen to hear any feedback, or if you want to continue the conversation, you know where to find us, I suppose.
Thank you very much.
No worries. Thanks, Ross. Joran asked a question around the OTP required immediately after providing the opaque identifier. around displaying a list of accounts. So we've had this conversation in the SIG around, is the list of accounts a sensitive thing that shouldn't be shared, or maybe shouldn't be shared with a PISP without their prior authorization? This is a tricky question because we have a few ways kind of around that. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer it.
So,
JJ, go ahead, please.
We've had a lot of discussions about this, about whether this is confidential, private, top secret information. First of all, in most of these systems, you automatically want to confirm the person on the other end. So given a phone number, you can find somebody's name now, right? Or some identifier. You can, when you try to send them money, you could fish for names as well. So that's already an issue. When we introduce multiple currencies, we also need to expose, right, when you're trying to send money to somebody, the recipient, the payee DFSP needs to provide back, well, okay, well, there's actually two, we have, given that phone number or whatever identifier it is, there's technically two accounts that it could go to, one for, say, US dollars, one for Tanzanian shillings, for example. And so now we're leaking that information. At this point, the only thing that's special about this is we might leak multiple accounts of the same currency, but if they happen to have different currencies, then it's the same as the other FX cases. And if they only have one account, then it's no different than the standard trying to send money to an account. I think we focus most of our effort, instead of trying to keep the list of accounts secret and their account nickname, the currencies they support and things like that, we spent more time focusing on making sure that the identifier for the linked account is not something that's useful outside the context of this specific link between the PISP and the payer DFSP in this case. So by that we mean the PISP should never have access to, for example, an IBAN or any other form of account number that would be useful in the traditional banking system. Instead, it's a special identifier that is only ever useful for this PISP initiating payments drawn from this payer's DFSP on this specific account. And if that were to be completely leaked, let's say the PISP has terrible security and their entire database just gets sent out on the internet over email, it wouldn't really be a big deal because you'd have these sort of arbitrary account source of fund account numbers, but you need the FIDO credential to make any of that work. So it really doesn't matter because that credential is still securely on the device that was used to register it. If it's an OTP, you need access to the phone, things of that nature. So in short, yes, our original design did include this idea of, well, we'll do two OTPs. The first one is to be able to list the accounts. The second one is to actually link an account. We opted to not do that because we felt that this type of information is something that seems reasonable enough to allow to expose to someone who, the worst case is someone's phishing to link accounts, in which case we just limit the, require the PISP through scheme rules to say, well, you can only make this many requests to list accounts per user per, time period, insert customizable time period here. So the answer is yes, we could, but no, we decided not to for now. If it comes up again as a really important thing that we do need to address, if there are jurisdictions where this is a really serious concern, then I'd love to hear more about it. But right now, our expectation is this is not exactly a thing that we wanted to do because it gets in the way of the user experience by having OTP 1 just to list accounts and then OTP 2 to link those accounts. We were sure that people wanted that second OTP. Hopefully that.
Thanks, JJ. That sounds good. I mean, we obviously have to balance usability in this versus the security. I would have said that a time-based OTP with a fairly narrow window would allow you to explore some other options. I'm not saying that it's appropriate just for someone to use an OTP to get a list of accounts and then to say, oh, and that's also good enough to link an account. That might be asking too much, but like you said, though, then asking for two completely separate OTPs will just drive people away. That sounds really horrible, frankly, to have to go through that experience. But there ought to be some narrow ceremony for listing and linking that is efficient enough, but also secure enough. And I'm made nervous by the idea that regardless of what the scheme rules say and regardless of what throttling is applied, people are nefarious when they choose to be. They can be very nefarious and use a mechanical Turk to collect as many accounts as they choose to, spread across a vast network of paid participants. So I would say that if we believe that acquiring that information from the list of accounts, if you will, is to be protected, we should be very careful about it and show how it could be done without saying, you know, you could do it, but this would be horrible, so you probably shouldn't do that. We should have something that we think is a reasonable solution. I don't know, time-based OTP, maybe, I don't know.
There's a couple, just on that note as well. We support two different ways to authenticate a user. One is OTP and the other is web. Now, with the web flow, which we don't have in the demo, so I can't demonstrate. The DFSP has an opportunity to present their own list of accounts to the user after they've done their own authentication, because the user is redirected by a web page to the DFSP's site. So this is only really, this whole OTP thing is only an issue if the DFSP doesn't support or they can't log in their user for some reason via an OTP. So it is kind of, we did decide let's lean towards just getting something that works. The other fallback option here as well, we said was, well, the DFSP could obfuscate a bunch of, if we enter an account nickname, I as user enter an account nickname, they could obfuscate a whole bunch of the characters of that account nickname, and it's just show me the last few letters of that account nickname, and perhaps that will be enough for the user to be able to see and identify which account they will be linking, or make sure that they're the right one. So
that's a very good idea. Yeah, it's getting into some of those cases and saying, look, we're not saying you have to do it this way, but we're showing that we've thought about it, and these are good design principles for you to study when you build a system out. I agree with that. I think though that saying, oh, it can all be done on the web. Well, of course it could be, but the problem is you're in an environment with USSD phones. They don't have web. And so using USSD phones for two-factor authentication is a very first world kind of thing to do. It's also not OTP is the sort of current plan for that. But if you think about, sending a link to an SMS that you then click on, that's not a great practice, because anybody can send you an SMS message with a link in it. What we'd like to do is get to where you have something that you could reasonably well defend as an approach without saying you have to do it this way. That's all I'm really getting at, I think, is to suggest a situational awareness for USSD environments. And of course, Taryn would tell us that there's other ways of adding security to these USSD phones using overlays. Those things should be possible. We should rely upon them, but they should also be possible. We want to say, well, you don't need to do that because we've got this other thing that's almost as good. We want to say, look, in an environment where you do want to use a SIM overlay, that should be completely possible to do that. And we should show kind of how does that get done. I think Taryn, probably his team could maybe work a little bit with how their system might work in that environment without becoming the only way it's done. It's a way to be sure that that option works.
Yeah. Thanks, Miller. Thanks everyone for your questions and your input. I think we'll leave it there. So you have a 1-minute break before the next session. Feel free to continue the conversation on the Pathable page. And you know where to find us here, or these emails, or in Slack, or I don't know, just mail pigeon, or all sorts. So thanks everyone, and enjoy the rest of the meeting.
Thanks, Miller. I like to work on this with the whole team.
Great, thank you.